Zhang entered the room, respectfully introducing himself as the 17th leader of the Black Tortoise Squad. Haoan observed Zhang, suspecting that Woon had more in mind than he had revealed. Woon inquired why Zhang had arrived at the library early in the morning, probing for urgency. Zhang produced the book from his chest, explaining that he had received it as a gift, but felt unease about accepting it. He acknowledged the impropriety of returning a gift, but maintained his reservations. Woon questioned whether anyone else had seen the Converging Clouds Hard Arts book, surprising Zhang. Zhang assured him that no one else had laid eyes on it. Woon remarked that Zhang's hasty arrival right after receiving the gift might suggest a close connection, particularly as the Black Tortoise Squad was known to be closer to Woon's fourth brother. He stressed that if rumors of Zhang's deep connection with him spread, his fourth brother might become a nuisance. Zhang confessed he hadn't considered these implications, but assured Woon that he had already asked Zhang once before. Woon remained skeptical, urging Zhang to confirm once more if no one else had seen the book. After a moment of silence, Zhang admitted that no one else had seen it, recalling that Taek had given him the gift. Young advised Zhang to make it appear as if he hadn't accepted the Converging Clouds Hard Arts, emphasizing that it was the only way to ensure everyone's safety. Zhang was left speechless, contemplating whether Taek intended to return the book without getting caught. Woon nodded, realizing that it was unlikely that no one else had seen it. Zhang's solitary return of the book seemed like a flawed plan, as Haoan had suggested. Myong Woon suspected that someone had pressured Zhang, indicating the presence of another person who wished to conceal the truth. He suggested to Zhang that it might be best to take the Converging Clouds Hard Arts with him. However, Zhang remained resolute in his decision to return the book. He addressed Myong Woon by his full name and turned to face him, posing a serious question about whether he was acting like a hypocritical noble until the end. Zhang's words shocked Myong Woon, who inquired about the meaning of a hypocritical noble and how such an accusation could be made. Zhang pointed out that excessive modesty could lead to their downfall and questioned the justice that the true cult pursued. In response, Zhang explained that the true cult's pursuit was centered on strength. He emphasized that the relentless pursuit and indulgence of strength had driven a wedge between the Heavenly Demon God cult and the Murim Union. While the Murim Union sought strength to protect justice, the Heavenly Demon God cult pursued power for its own sake. The Converging Clouds Hard Arts significantly enhanced one's power, yet Young had refused it due to excessive modesty, which Zhang argued was not in line with the true cult's teachings. Zhang respectfully bowed and acknowledged that he had not been as thoughtful as he should have been. Young advised him to return and deeply contemplate the teachings of the true cult, and Zhang pledged to engrave his words deep in his heart. As Zhang left, he marveled at Woon's profound thoughts at such a young age, and recognized that the blood of the Heavenly Demon truly set them apart. He discreetly concealed the book within his clothes. The next day at the training ground, Zhang loudly urged his men to move faster, expressing unease as he observed their reluctance to practice. Woon sensed that something was amiss and questioned whether they were implying they couldn't perform sword techniques beyond the Great Mountain Sword Arts. Haoan sought Zhang's opinion, prompting a puzzled look from him. Haoan clarified that Zhang was referring to their martial arts. Zhang explained that while these men had grasped the basics, they still lacked proficiency in many areas, raising concerns for Woon, despite their selection by the Black Tortoise Corps. Haoan revealed that the men, including the 17th team led by Zhang, were not considered particularly strong within the Black Tortoise Corps. The truly formidable individuals were found in the White Tiger Corps and Vermilion Bird Corps. Haoan assured Myong Woon that while Zhang Moon's martial arts were currently on par with these men, he had approached Zhang with an eye on the future. Myong Woon then turned to Haoan and inquired about the likelihood of his fourth brother remaining passive. Haoan responded confidently, stating that the fourth sir wouldn't have any other choice. Zhang returned once more, this time because his fourth son, Myung-jun, wasn't responding as expected. Fearing he might have mistaken Myung-jun for someone else, Zhang began to walk away. Haoan, curious about his intentions, asked where he was headed. Zhang explained that there was something he had to attend to, and promptly ordered Haoan to continue gathering information about Zhang and reporting it to him. Haoan nodded and followed his command. A minute later, Woon arrived at the West Quarter and relaxed, recognizing this as a fundamental aspect of the breathing technique. Unlike the lotus position of the 9 sects in one guild, he rested his hands on his knees instead of his Kai center. After taking a deep breath through his nose and drawing it deep into his body, he exhaled through his mouth. Feeling he was off to a good start, he understood that in the basics of inner Kai hard arts, an empty mind was essential, or even satisfaction was not allowed. He concentrated to the point where he lost track of time, practicing until the sunset completely disappeared. Upon hearing a bell ringing outside, he opened his eyes and realized that there were 2 strikes on the wooden bell indicating that it was 2 in the morning. He decided to finish his work for the day and stood up. As he did so, he noticed his sweat dripping onto the floor and wondered if it was the deep sweat stage, a sign that bad energy was spreading throughout his body and mixing with his sweat. Woon was sure that he was progressing much faster than before, but he couldn't help feeling a bit concerned that he was getting overly excited just for reaching the deep sweat stage. As he slowly fell to the floor, he couldn't shake the disappointment that his body felt weak. He wondered if it was because he had reached the deep sweat stage without having a ki center. He felt pathetic, recognizing the 18-year gap in martial arts and experience between himself and the first Myeon Jung. Even his third brother, Myung Woon, had become an expert, leading the way. Woon knew that he needed to bridge this gap and couldn't afford to fall behind. In frustration, he cursed under his breath and resolved to improve his stamina, vowing to do better starting from the next day. Meanwhile, outside, Howen thought he heard someone sleeping somewhere and briefly questioned his own hearing. The next day, Howen panicked and called Woon, prompting him to ask what was wrong. Howen delivered the news that Jong had been demoted and assigned to the garrison at the Great Mountain entrance, Chongha Peak. Woon smiled, relieved that Jong hadn't been expelled. While it might not have been the best outcome, it was certainly better than the worst. He informed Howen that they wouldn't be able to bring Jong back immediately, to which Howen agreed, but he expressed hope that Jong might join them again soon. Woon entrusted Howen with the matter, and Howen respectfully concurred. A month later, since he had been diligently training in the Taigong Ki cultivation technique, Woon finally developed a ki center, albeit only the size of a fingertip. He considered this a significant milestone, having essentially passed the first hurdle. He knew that the high sky hard arts were the best way to expand the lower ki center, so he focused on steadily collecting Kai and converting it into inner strength. When he reached the top of his house, he unleashed his power and noticed that the amount of Kai he was gathering wasn't insignificant. This led him to speculate that it might be due to reaching the deep sweat stage. With this accelerated pace, he was confident he would be able to open his middle ki center within 3 years. The following day, the maid woke him up early, informing him that it was time to get up. Woon inquired about the time, and she replied that it was around 5 in the morning. He wondered why she needed to come in so early, and she reminded him that it was the day to meet the cult leader, who was also his father. Moments later, Seok Bi-yeon, the head maid of the Grand Flower Palace, and the secretary of the Heavenly Demon cult leader, greeted him. It had been a while since they had last seen each other. Woon knew that Yeon was skilled both in beauty and martial arts. Despite her closeness to his father, she wasn't allowed to be his father's mistress. He informed her that he had requested her as his guide, and she led the way. As they walked, he couldn't help but wonder if Yeon was from the Gizuch clan, as he seemed to be getting involved with them in many places. A minute later, they arrived at the room, and Yeon suggested it would be a good idea for Howen to wait nearby. Howen agreed and said he would wait outside. Yeon let Woon inside, and once he was seated, she remarked that he was the first to arrive today as well. He asked if it wasn't obvious that the youngest had come early, and she replied by asking how it could be obvious. He responded that he believed it was undutiful to make his father and brothers wait, to which she complimented him, saying it was a good answer. As she was about to leave, she told him that it seemed like he had learned many things from books, and noticed something had changed in him. Woon wondered what it was, and speculated whether it was his clear eyes, calm voice, or soft actions. Then he admitted to her that he was learning many things from books, but did not believe everything could be found in books, leaving her shocked. Suddenly, Myeong-tak barged into the room and shouted, ordering Yeon to guide him. Myeong-tak noticed Woon and asked how he had arrived earlier than him, to which Woon simply replied that it was because he left early. Myeong-tak, however, questioned whether Woon had some ulterior motive, but Woon denied such thoughts, stating that he was in a hurry. Yeon noticed the change in Woon and pondered what it was that he didn't have before, but now possessed, something that made him more composed. Just then, someone else burst into the room and exclaimed that it seemed they all had hurried. He nervously replied that it was a problem if he arrived later than his brother. The fifth of his brothers, Myeong-jong, entered the room, causing Woon to reflect that his past self wouldn't have known that Jong's loud voice and exaggerated movements were all an act to hide his true thoughts. Before we continue, take a moment to answer the question of the day. Power of light or power of darkness? Comment down below for a chance to be shouted out. Now back to the recap. Myeong-jong sweetly greeted Myeong-tak, asking how he was doing. Myeong-tak was surprised by this warm greeting and told his brother to wait a minute. Jong also inquired about Woon's well-being, and Woon respectfully mentioned that it had been a while and that he had spent his time reading books. However, Jong interjected, commenting on Woon's continued focus on Confucius sayings and dismissing them as mendacious. Despite Zhong's attempt to shame him, Woon calmly revealed that he had been reading the divine cult's holy text as well, determined not to let Zhong's words affect him. Suddenly, someone informed them that the great cult leader was on his way, making Woon realize that his father had finally arrived. The leader of the heavenly demon divine cult, Myung-jung, entered the room and greeted his sons after a long absence. He inquired about how long they were planning to stand, and instructed them to sit down, to which they all complied silently. Jung noticed that Jung had made some progress in his training, but Jung admitted that it was still not enough, displaying his nervousness. This revelation made Woon realize that Jung might have been exaggerating earlier, but he couldn't confidently voice his thoughts. Jung encouraged Jung, telling him that with hard work, he could achieve his goals. Jung expressed his gratitude to his father. Next, Myung-jum turned to Myung-tak and asked if he had chosen his path. Myung-tak, sounding anxious, replied affirmatively, stating that he was aiming for the 4 great protection laws, demonstrating his dedication to martial arts. Myung-tak also promised to begin immediately, his hands trembling with nervousness. Jung observed that even Myung-tak was feeling anxious and wondered if meetings with their father were always this burdensome. Myung-jung then called Woon's name and mentioned hearing some rumors about him, suggesting that he had experienced some sort of enlightenment. Woon noticed that his father's words had changed, but were now referred to as an enlightenment. Woon tried to downplay it, but Jung assured him that he didn't have to hide it. Jung explained that enlightenment didn't only apply to martial arts stages. It could also refer to a change in one's mindset or life attitude. Woon replied that he was just living each day to the fullest. Yeon couldn't believe how calm Woon was, even when his brothers were nervous. She knew that not many people could act that way in front of the cult leader. As the maid served the food, Myung-jung wondered if the youngest master could be a candidate for an airship. During the meal, Myung-tak whispered to Jung, asking if he had answered well, and Jung nodded. Jung thought that Myung-tak had always been like this, so it didn't matter to him. But he wondered if Woon had always had that kind of personality. Jung slammed his chopsticks on the table and asked if they wanted anything, instructing Jung to speak first. Dion replied that there was nothing lacking thanks to the care of many people. Jung then asked Myung-tak what he wanted, and Myung-tak, sweating, expressed his desire for a double-edged sword. Jung promised to give Myung-tak a double-edged sword as a gift if he achieved something in his martial arts. Myung-tak thanked his father. Jung asked Woon what he wanted, making Woon wonder why he was always the last one. He thought that he just had to answer well at this moment. Woon told Jung that he didn't know what he'd think if he said it, but he needed silver ingots. Jung asked why he needed silver ingots, and if it was to buy more books. Woon replied that it wasn't for books, and Jung asked him why he needed silver tokens. Woon clenched his hands, unsure if his plan would work, but he knew he should give it a try. He explained to Jung that he was thinking about his studies and couldn't pay attention to the people under him. A few days ago, he happened to check out their lodgings, and the situation didn't look good. Jung asked if it meant he needed money to take care of the people under him, and Woon replied that he thought a nobleman who couldn't take care of his surroundings was no different than a snob. This surprised his father, but he hoped his plan would work. Suddenly, Jung laughed loudly and shouted that he couldn't have his youngest son become a snob. He told him that he'd give him silver ingots after their meal together. Howen, worried, ran toward Woon and asked him what had happened. He asked How and what she meant, and Howen told him that he had heard loud laughter coming from the pavilion, making him wonder if it had been heard that far. Woon told Howen that it was nothing, and that he had just asked for some silver ingots from his father, leaving Howen shocked. Howen asked him if he had chosen silver ingots that weren't for martial arts, and Woon simply asked how and why that would be strange. Howen shouted, telling him that it was very strange and that he had missed an opportunity to learn martial arts when it only happened once in a while. However, Woon told Howen to forget it and ordered him to get the drill hall ready once they got back. Howen, confused, asked him why and who it would be used for. Woon told Howen that he talked a lot, and of course, it was to be used by him to train in martial arts. Howen, even more confused, asked if he had ever learned martial arts before, and if he was trying to hire a teacher with the silver ingots he received from the cult leader. Woon simply asked how and what he was talking about and told him that he was going to use that money elsewhere. Howen asked if he had decided where to use it, and Woon replied that he had. He gave a scroll to Howen and ordered him to recruit the people listed in that document. Howen looked at Woon suspiciously and asked him if he thought those on the list were trustworthy people. Woon replied that it was what he knew. Howen thought that Woon never left the West Quarters, so the people listed were probably recommended by Woon himself. He guessed that it was worth a try and told Woon to leave it to him. Before Howen left, Woon ordered him to improve the lodgings and food of the servants staying at the West Quarters. If anyone was having a hard time in their family, he should help them. Howen asked him if he needed to go that far, as he thought it seemed a bit excessive. Woon told Howen that this was why he had asked for the money from his father. He explained that he wanted to improve the treatment of the people under him. Meanwhile, on the bridge, Jung asked Yeon what she thought. Yeon asked him if he was talking about Woon. Jung asked her why Woon needed silver ingots when what he needed should be martial arts. Yeon told Jung that it might be because Woon was looking down instead of looking at himself. Woon was too much at the bottom to be looking above him. Also, Woon might be looking down rather than up, so it was a natural thing for him. More than anything, she suggested that Jung consider if looking down might be a good idea. Jung told her that he thinks quite differently and wondered if Woon had recognized that he was at the top. In other words, Woon realized that there were people below him. She told Jung that Woon's changed attitude and actions must be because of that realization. Woon was well aware of who he was and what kind of position he was in. Jung told her that it might be a cruel thing for Woon, but she suggested that it might open up a new path. In the west quarters, Woon sneezed loudly and wondered if someone was talking about him. He then swung his wooden sword, not knowing how long it had been since he had wielded his sword. He lifted his sword up, thinking that he should begin, and swung it hard. He continuously practiced his sword, thinking that he should show his clumsy side to some extent, so that if there was a spy in the room, they could take a good look. One of the maids noticed that he was practicing the Great Mountain sword arts, and wondered whom he had learned it from. She also noticed that Woon's stance was perfect, but there was no power behind his strikes, because he lacked internal energy. It seemed like the seventh prince was saying that there was no need to worry because he was powerless. However, when he grabbed the wooden sword tightly, focused in front of him, and speedily swung his sword in a great position, she was shocked to realize that it was not the Great Mountain sword arts. He had almost used phantom blades. The lady's mouth was open in shock, and Woon hoped that no one had noticed. But then someone said that it was nice, making him shocked. He asked who it was, and the lady was surprised when he asked, and immediately knelt on the floor, telling him that she had made a serious mistake. Woon ordered her to lift her head, and assured her that he wouldn't punish her. He then asked her name, and she replied that she was Jung Yoon. He inquired if she knew martial arts, and she said she had learned a bit before arriving, making him think that many people there learned martial arts, so it wasn't unusual. He then explained that if she knew martial arts, she would be responsible for cleaning and tidying up the training hall from now on, to which she agreed. Meanwhile, at the main base of the Vermilion Bird Squad, a man questioned whether it was the right decision, and Howen replied that his master Woon had personally chosen Jo Kwang. He believed that if Jo Kwang were a skilled martial artist, he would have a good understanding of everything, even if he wasn't the group leader. This made the man wonder if Jo Kwang was concealing his internal martial arts abilities. Suddenly, the man earnestly advised Howen that if he knew anything, it would be wise to share it. This made Howen feel the seriousness of the situation and wonder if it was about squad trill martial arts. He found it hard to believe that the man possessed so much knowledge of internal martial arts and questioned whether the man cared about the well-being of the general of the West Quarters. He explained that Woon wanted a guard to protect him and mentioned that the living conditions in the West Quarters had improved, allowing them to afford a guard. The man agreed that this might be the case, but asked why Jo Kwang had to be the choice. Howen replied that although the living conditions had improved, they couldn't afford to hire well-known masters. Kwon asked if this meant they were hiring an unknown martial artist because they lacked funds, and Howen reluctantly confirmed that was the case. The man acknowledged that he understood the need to hire an unknown martial artist, but felt that his question hadn't been fully answered. Nevertheless, he mentioned that he would review young Master Woon's requests. Howen shouted his gratitude to the man on behalf of his young master. He realized that squad trill martial arts would demand a decade of his life, and wondered if he would have to deal with 4 or more of those people in the future. As night came, Howen burst into Woon's room, shouting for him, his panic evident. Howen told him that they needed to sever ties with the person who had sent him the list. Woon asked how and why, knowing that he was the one who had created the list. Howen, in anger, told him there wasn't a single decent person among them. He strongly asked if the list was that unusual, and Howen responded loudly, saying it wasn't just strange. Every person on the list was useless. At this rate, the West Quarters would become a group of troublesome individuals. Howen, not being an expert, thought that most of the people on the list were at least somewhat good. Howen said they could dismiss Jo Kwang of Vermilion Bird Squad as merely ignorant because Kwang didn't have a reputation yet, but Peng Hyo Chung of the White Tiger Squad was a lazy drunkard with very low martial arts skills. Woon wondered if Hyo Chung was like that. Howen mentioned that Kwon Him of Red Wind Squad was also a problem because Him had been imprisoned in the underground prison for mutiny. This made Woon wonder why that innocent child was in the underground prison. Howen went on to say that the other people were also problematic, including a notorious thief and even someone who frequented brothels due to a strong liking for women. Howen stressed that no matter what, it seemed like they needed to reconsider bringing them in as his guards. Woon asked him why he wanted them as guards and pointed out that 2 of them were squad leaders, and the remaining 3 had been promoted to vice squad leaders. He asked Howen what the problem was, and told him that even if they hired them and it didn't work out, they wouldn't have anything to lose. This left Howen shocked and silent. Then Woon told Howen that even though they were unknown, they weren't necessarily bad people, and it wouldn't be a problem to expel them later if necessary. Even though he noticed they were a bit different from what he had expected, Woon thought he had a point, and there were people with a lot of issues, so even if they were expelled suddenly, it wouldn't harm the reputation of the West Quarters. Howen suggested testing the potential guards before hiring them, which Woon agreed to, considering it a good idea. The next morning in the drill hall, a loud fight erupted as a yellow-haired man named Jong Yong-se was shouting and calling another man a bastard. Kwon tried to intervene and stop the fight, but Woon asked Howen if they were starting a fight on their own. Howen explained that these individuals had a lot of problems, and it wasn't surprising. Woon pulled a chair for himself and decided to watch them closely to assess their skills. Howen provided some information about the fighters. Jong Yong-se appeared to be nimble, agile, and skilled, with impressive technique. Jong seemed improvisational in his movements, and Kwon Him, a former member of the Red Wind Squad, was trying to overpower his opponent with brute force. The fight continued with punches and dodges, and it seemed like it wouldn't end easily. He asked Howen for his opinion, and Howen suggested that it was a waste of time to watch further, as it was clear they had excellent skills. Woon agreed and ordered Howen to stop the fight. As they were about to stop, Kwon Hiem angrily attempted to punch Jong Yongs again, but Jong Yongs dodged and retaliated. However, their fight was interrupted when someone grabbed both of their hands and threw them away. It was General Kong Hawon of the West Quarters, who introduced himself and instructed the 5 men to greet young Master Woon. The men, including Jo Kwang and Jong Yongse, greeted Woon respectfully. Woon explained that he had called them there to select warrior guards for the West Quarters. Jong Yongse and Kwon exchanged glares, but they all realized that Woon intended to send those not selected to Mount Baowei, a perilous place. In the Guizhou clan, Patriarch Seok Jun Myung discussed Woon and the successor competition with Yeon. Yeon suggested not putting too much emphasis on Woon's interest, but Jun Mayang had different plans. He intended to use Woon as a disruptive force to upset the balance in the successor competition, even if it meant Woon's chances of winning were slim. Back in the drill hall, Kwon wondered how long they were supposed to keep up this test, and if Woon was pushing their limits. The men were seething with anger. They hadn't anticipated a grueling day and night of relentless, non-stop sparring. His mind raced with thoughts of what would happen if they slacked off and failed to meet their expectations. Would they be dragged into the dreaded Mount Baowei, a place synonymous with punishment and suffering? Howen, their instructor, noticed the exhaustion etched on the faces of the 5 men. He reassured them that this intensive training was solely for today's examination, and that they should return to their posts and rest afterward. After checking on each one of them, Howen inquired about their performance and well-being. To his relief, Howen found the recruits not just physically capable, but also brimming with potential. He couldn't help but wonder where they had unearthed such talents. Howen suggested that with the right guidance, these recruits could surpass most of the team's captain-level martial artists. He hinted at the idea of bringing in an experienced trainer to further develop their skills, which made Howen contemplate if there were hidden motives behind Woon's supporters. Howen continued, revealing a condition for their cooperation. He proposed teaching the bodyguards in an underground training room, but insisted on maintaining strict anonymity during the training. Howen was perplexed by this request, questioning the feasibility of effective instruction without face-to-face interaction. After a moment of contemplation, he reluctantly agreed, realizing it might be the only way forward. The following morning, at the training field, the men, exhausted and impatient, inquired about their next challenge. On the other hand, Peng Hyo-chung asked Jo Kwang if his name was indeed Jo Kwang, a question that left Kwon feeling anxious about his survival prospects. Kwon Him reassured him that at the very least, they wouldn't be dragged into Mount Baowei due to Woon's interest in them. However, a man cynically questioned the credibility of this reassuring promise. General Kong Howen's arrival interrupted their banter, and he asked if they were all ready. The group energetically replied in unison. General Howen ordered them to gather closer. Although they weren't particularly thrilled about their roles as bodyguards, they much preferred working under Woon than facing the horrors of Mount Baowei. Woon acknowledged their commitment with a reassuring smile towards General Howen. General Howen continued with the surprising news that their young master, Woon, had decided to be merciful and had passed all 5 of them in their training. This revelation left the group somewhat bewildered, but General Howen went on to explain that there were conditions attached. Addressing Pang Heo-chung, General Howen emphasized that there would be no more drinking starting from today. Heo-chung, puzzled, sought clarification on what he meant by no drinking. General Howen explained that Heo-chung's lack of progress was attributed to his alcohol consumption. Kwon Him, in a bit of panic, assured General Howen that he had missed a few training sessions, but it wasn't because of alcohol. Woon agreed to give him a chance to prove his commitment, setting up a spar against Jo Kwang in 10 days. This news left Jo Kwang stunned and bewildered. Before we continue, let's take a moment to shout out at Blee768, who commented BW video on our Dr. Isekai video. Thanks for commenting. Heo-chung, understanding the seriousness of the situation, replied that he accepted the challenge and promised to abstain from drinking until then, vowing to indulge once he won the spar. Woon, however, pointed out that he had heard that Heo-chung enjoyed fighting, to which Heo-chung clarified that it wasn't that he enjoyed it, it was just that many people seemed to provoke him. Woon questioned why people provoked him, but Heo-chung couldn't provide a clear answer. Woon then forbade him from starting unnecessary fights and gave him a chance to prove himself in 5 days. Ignoring Heo-chung's continued chatter, Jong Yongse inquired if his chance involved sparring with Kwon, to which Woon confirmed. This left Kwon feeling anxious and calling out in despair. Woon then turned his attention to Kwon Him and mentioned that he had heard about his peculiar habits, warning him that any trouble arising from them would result in extreme measures like limb amputation. This threat made Kwon Him jump in fear, and he promised to correct his habits, fervently pleading for leniency. Woon agreed to give Kwon Him a chance as well, instructing him to win a spar against Kwon after half a month. Kwon, feeling defeated, didn't respond. Yongsa, who had witnessed the entire exchange, pledged to stay far away from women if he lost to Kwon, even swearing not to hold a woman's hand. Kwon, feeling defeated as well, agreed to the terms. The other 4 men looked at Kwon kneeling on the ground, thinking that it shouldn't be too challenging to defeat him. Woon instructed them to head back, leaving Kwon wondering what Woon had in mind for him. Later, Woon called Kwon and ordered him to follow. They arrived at an underground training room in the Western Quarter, where Woon informed Kwon that they had invited an expert to teach him martial arts. Kwon, surprised by the prospect of learning martial arts, inquired if that was the purpose of the underground training room. Woon confirmed it and added that with this expert's guidance, Kwon wouldn't have any trouble facing the other 4. However, they needed to clean the training room before commencing their training. Kwon, eager to begin, asked when he could start learning and expressed his desire to receive instruction before facing the others. Woon questioned if Kwon believed he couldn't win now, and Kwon, with a tinge of shame, agreed with Woon's assessment. Woon then advised Kwon that a man needed to have some swagger and not appear overly honest. He emphasized the importance of appearing confident, as being too reserved would hinder his ability to showcase his skills. Woon suggested they start training in 2 days, and Kwon vowed to break free from his shell of normalcy and become strong. Woon instructed Kwon to head back first, as he had other matters to attend to, and Kwon agreed and left. When alone underground, Woon called Jong Yoon, who had been hiding, and told her she could come out now. She apologized to him, but he reassured her that it was fine. He then inquired if she had mentioned learning martial arts, and stressed the importance of knowing someone's background. Woon expressed interest in seeing the martial arts she had learned. Yoon explained that her current attire wasn't suitable, but Woon assured her that perfection wasn't necessary. He simply wanted to gauge her level. Yoon agreed, and Woon wondered with excitement whether she would become a loyal disciple. As Yoon demonstrated her moves, Woon noticed that she was using the Black Wolf Leopard Fist technique, a technique not commonly taught in the Heavenly Demon Divine cult. He found this troublesome and wondered if Yoon had no connection to the Great Mountain No clan, as that clan was associated with his 4th brother. He abruptly stopped her and asked who had taught her the Black Wolf Leopard Fist technique. Yoon explained that she had learned it from her uncle, Zhang Xiao, who worked as the 12th team captain of the White Tiger Corps. Woon trusted the White Tiger Corps and asked her about her proficiency in sword techniques. She replied that she could use the Great Mountain Sword technique. Woon questioned why he didn't remember her face when she had been in the Western Quarters for 3 years. Yoon then handed Woon something and urged him to eat it, which initially shocked her when she realized what it was. 5 days later, in the training field, Hwan stretched his body behind him, and Kwon Him asked Hyo-chung who he thought was going to win. Hyo-chung replied that he apologized to Kwon, but Jong Yongse would probably win. Kwon Him mentioned that Kwon hadn't been showing his face lately, and Jo Kwang speculated that Kwon might be learning some strange techniques from somewhere. Woon arrived with General Howen and Kwon, and Jong Yongse informed him that he had finished all the preparations and had been waiting for him. He asked Kwon if he was ready as well, and Kwon replied with a simple yes. Jo Kwang, noticing the absence of emotions on Kwon's face and his altered appearance, wondered if Jong Yongse was going to lose. What will happen next? Find out next time by staying tuned for our future recaps. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more great recaps.